Vintage Story is a voxel-based survival sandbox game that is currently under development by NGO Studios. While the game is technically in the early access phase, it already excels in many aspects of its respective genre. Among the highlights of the game are unmatched level of immersion, ability to tailor the playstyle to one's liking through a variety of settings, extremely mod-friendly design, a very tactile and interactive feel to the world, and a unique art style that ties everything together in a cohesive package that is a joy to play. With that being said, this video is not about singing praise to this incredible game. While the overall package is great, the game has many critical flaws that need addressing. In this video, I want to break down and digest some of the shortcomings that will probably prevent this game from ascending to the mainstream level of popularity. Before we get into the details, I want to start with a disclaimer. I fully acknowledge that this is an early access title and by definition not feature complete. Furthermore, everything in this video is my personal opinion. I don't pretend to objectively know what's best for the game. Third and final point. Yes, I will compare this game to the game that shall not be named. Minecraft. There seems to be a lot of vitriol on Vintage Story's community anytime Minecraft is brought up. I understand that most Vintage Story players do not want to see this game evolve into something Minecraft-like. In fact, many Vintage Story enjoyers seek refuge from Minecraft because they're unhappy with the game's past or current direction. Nonetheless, as the most genre-adjacent game, it offers a unique case study for what works in the genre and what doesn't. There are important lessons to be learned here, and I personally think it's a blessing we have another game to compare to. As such, it is inevitable that I will bring up Minecraft for comparison on a semi-regular basis. In conclusion, I love Vintage Story, and I think it's already a great game, well worth its price. I'm insanely excited for its continued development and want nothing more than a resounding success for this indie masterpiece. So, if you must disagree, do so politely, and without further ado, let's get into it. One of the first choices that a player gets to make in the game is selecting a class. I am a big fan of the class system. It rewards planning, strategy, and creates a certain amount of replayability. I spent many hours theory crafting the most optimal characters for a variety of difficult challenges I like to face. Do you want to secure an early food supply from a relative safety or range class like a hunter? Or do you want continuously raid ancient ruins with the malefactor to get variety of early game loot? These choices matter and add a variety of approaches to the game, thus adding much needed variance to every playthrough. In a multiplayer setting, these classes also offer a sense of identity and create a division of labor, thus adding to the fantasy of a fully cohesive society. So far, so good. My problem with the class system is that it doesn't go far enough. The beneficial traits are rather minor, and the downsides are trivial in most cases. This issue is magnified in the late game, where most of these benefits stop being useful. In the end, most classes will not play much differently from each other once technological superiority is established. And that's a shame. I would much prefer the classes to continue feeling unique throughout the lifespan of a long-term world. I personally think that the mod called More Classes has the right philosophy. Reinforce the beneficial traits by a lot, while also scaling out the downsides significantly. In many cases, the vanilla class bonuses can be easily doubled and sometimes tripled. The default magnitudes of these bonuses do not offer enough variance to the game. If you don't believe me, here's a real example. Malefactor's 15% extra loot from cracked vessels might sound like a lot, but in practice only amounts to an extra drop or two. If you were to drop 13 pieces of blue clay from a vessel, the trait might bump this amount to 15. It is certainly helpful, but it does not offer a radically different experience if you were to break the same vessel with a tailor. If you were to double the bonuses, now you're looking at 5 extra items. My point is, doubling the numerical bonuses of most classes would not be game-breaking. It might certainly sound overpowered out of context, but don't forget, the point is to balance these traits against the negatives. Which means the negatives can also be doubled in many instances, really forcing you to play around the downsides. Most downsides are currently just a small nuisance. The only downside that is somewhat felt is perhaps the 30% increased hunger on the Blackguard, and even then, for an experienced player, it is a pretty insignificant number. If the developers were to double or triple the negatives, the classes would start feeling a bit more distinct. Yes, the benefits would be a lot more powerful, but so would be the downsides, forcing you into a unique playstyle. I would also like to see more unique abilities for these classes rather than numerical benefits. For example, a hunter could have a trait that allows him to track animals in the wild, and a malefactor could have a unique craftable that helps him to locate ruins. Offer something truly unique to each class. The Clockwork's ability to tame locusts is a good example of a fun and unique ability despite it being exceptionally bad. Of course, modifying the classes in such a way presents one big problem: the commoner. The commoner gets progressively less powerful and appealing the better the other classes are. Perhaps the right balancing between the upsides and the downsides for other classes can bring the commoner in line with the rest. Or maybe the commoner needs a couple of extra upsides to himself. The commoner could have access to all class-specific recipes and/or have a few powerful recipes of his own. Ultimately, it is up to the developers to come up with the right balancing. The roadmap mentions a planned character development system in the future similar to the X Skills mod, so perhaps that is a route they're planning to take long-term while leaving the class system to only impart a small alteration to the playstyle. It would be a shame though if that is the case. I implore the developers to lean more into the class system. I fully acknowledge that there is a whole other side to this debate. A non-trivial amount of people want the class system gone altogether. I don't really see a great reason to go down that route though. After all, these classes are a personal choice, and if one does not care for any of them, the commoner is a choice for a reason. My next point will be less controversial. I think we can all agree that the default terrain generation in vanilla is severely lacking. There is a lot of discontinuity and jaggedness to the default vanilla terrain. It makes the world hard to navigate, hard to traverse, and a lot less believable. You will see a lot of weird terrain anomalies, a lack of plains and valleys, and an overwhelming amount of random verticality. What's interesting is that there are a variety of mods that address this exact problem, and they do a fine job while at it. As such, I'm a little surprised that the developers don't address the default terrain generation. It doesn't seem like it would require some crazy engine rewrite, but rather some gentle tweaking of settings to nudge the world to be smoother and more cohesive. I do think that the world generation will get several adjustments in the future. I do have a few more things to say about generation, we are not done yet. My other feelings about the generation is that the default cave system is a bit lacking. I know that the modern version of Minecraft takes the cave system to the extreme, with the caverns looking more like grand cathedrals carved out by the hand of God rather than naturally occurring phenomena. I am not advocating we go down that route at all, but I do wish the cave system was more expansive and interconnected. I spend more time exploring the underground in spectator mode than an average player, I'm sure of that. I feel like the underground real estate in the game is criminally underused. The caves are small, cramped, and poorly interconnected. Many caves and underground ruins will remain undiscovered because they simply don't connect or open to anything. Outside of random digging, they are impossible to find. It would be nice if there was a way to explore these caves more easily, and in general, these caves could be a bit larger, more frequent, and take up more empty underground space. Now, I get that redesigning the cave generation is probably a much bigger task than tweaking the surface generation, but it would be a nice addition to the overall game. There is other aspect of generation I would like to see improved. The world parameters are a bit obtuse and not very descriptive of their exact function. Similar parameters can often generate a wildly different landscape. A good example of that is when I was trying to generate an island survival challenge map for my recent video. Even though I used the exact same settings for each time, the results were so radically different that I kept checking that I didn't misclick a wrong value somewhere along the way. A solution to that would be a better terrain algorithm that generates more consistent results, better descriptions for the settings, explaining their actual contributions, and more important, an ability to build and select presets. It would be nice if there was a way to select terrain generation presets created by the developers, but it would also be nice to have an additional functionality to share presets among the broader community. Perhaps we can have a tab where you can select things like desert, Arctic, island, and other types of seas. Minecraft has a similar function to generate biome-specific worlds. Vintage Story would be a perfect candidate for a similar feature. This would add more content for people to engage with and will allow people to study the settings to better understand the inner workings of the terrain generation. Seems like an easy way to generate tons of additional content for players and YouTubers alike. Let's move to another thing that needs improving, and this one is a big one: bear AI. By far the worst aspect of Vintage Story in its current form are the bears. They are absolutely everywhere, they do some of the highest damage in the game, and their behavior is extremely aggressive. I don't quite understand why the bears are so unforgiving in this game. Let's contrast the bear to another big threat in Vintage Story, the wolf. Unlike the bear, the wolf gives you an audible warning before it will attack. If you pay attention to the audible cues and react quickly enough, an encounter with a wolf is entirely avoidable. Yes, that's not always the case, and perhaps a wolf can stand a few behavioral adjustments too, but it's still miles ahead of the bear. Once you hear the bear, it's already too late. Even if you spot the charging bear ahead of time, the bear will often chase you until you are dead, unlike the wolf, who will often leave you alone rapidly. Even further, the bear is known to camp your dead body, thus making body recovery an insanely frustrating affair. This often breaks the game immersion dead in its tracks. Bears do not behave like this in nature and will largely avoid humans unless hungry or provoked. I think the bear AI is in need of an emergency adjustment. First order of business is to distinguish the bear's behavior according to its breed. A black bear can be a bit more skittish and avoidant, while a white bear can be the mean killing machine similar to its real-world counterpart. A brown bear can be somewhere in the middle. Next, let's introduce bear cubs to the game. An encounter with cubs plus their mom should spell trouble, while an encounter with a single bear can be modulated by the season. In spring and summer, when food is abundant, bears can be more docile, while hungry bears in the winter can be a lot more aggressive. Perhaps more sound warnings are warranted as well, thus giving careful seraphims a chance to avoid bear encounters altogether. If we're to keep the bears around in their current form, can we please tone down their spawn rate? And for God's sake, can they just fuck off into the wild instead of sitting on top of your body? Moving on to the next topic, and this one is perhaps the weakest aspect of this blog game. Let's talk about combat and vintage story. Combat is much to be desired. I feel like it's a common complaint and not many people will disagree here. First, the combat in any game will always depend on two basic factors, animations and sounds. The interplay of animations and sounds is fundamentally what separates satisfying combat from one that leaves you wanting more. Vintage story squarely falls into the second camp. The animations feel wonky with a weird delay on the swing and another delay when they return to a neutral state. The impact sounds and enemy grunts are extremely basic as well. This imparts a sluggish feel to the combat. You press an attack button and there's a sense of weird latency even though you are not playing online. On top of that, the swing and the impact sound anemic and as a result, it doesn't feel satisfying or visceral. Combat in Vintage Story feels like a bit of an afterthought, to be honest. Redesigning all of the animations and recording new combat sounds is probably a massive amount of work, so why not start with the basics? In a head-scratching move, blocking involves equipping a shield and crouching. I think block needs to be an active ability, just like how it is in most games. This would instantly make combat a lot more dynamic. To summarize, make block an active ability, add a blocking animation and a blocking sound. Minecraft, of course, had this mechanic for ages. From blocking creeper explosions, barrages of skeleton arrows, or hordes of zombies, this simple mechanic adds a lot of depth. Of course, we can't talk about combat in a vacuum. Combat implies enemies, and unfortunately, Vintage Story falls short here yet again. First, let's talk about animals. There isn't a lot of design space for animals in terms of combat. After all, seeing a moose shoot lasers out of his eyes would be immersion breaking, and expecting a wolf to do anything other than melee is asking too much. Despite that, animal combat could be made a little more interesting. My idea to improve animal combat is to give each animal a unique attack pattern, something that can be learned and memorized to leverage one's knowledge against them. While wild animals offer limited design space, drifters are where we can let our imagination fly. Currently, they just melee and toss rocks for extremely low damage. Devs should take away their annoying rock tossing shenanigans and instead implement a few ranged drifter varieties. The ranged drifters could be given a much deadlier ranged attack with a long wind-up time. And why stop there? The higher level drifters should offer something unique. Unlike the moose, they can shoot lasers out of their eyes, have damaging auras, poison on hit, and cast spells. Shit, why not have flying drifters as well? The design space for drifters is infinite, outside of lore reasons I suppose. I know that the 1.20 update will add new monster types, and I'm excited to see what the devs are cooking. But this won't solve the fundamental issues with combat. We can't keep progressively adding new monster types without addressing animations, sounds, and active defensive options either. Another aspect of the game that could be fleshed out is the temporal instability. It is a common question on Reddit. What can I do about temporally unstable areas if I want to settle there? And the answer is nothing. Well, there are a few workarounds. You can install an outdated mod to fix the local stability on a per chunk basis. However, it requires turning on the developer mode to see the chunk borders. It also hasn't been updated in a while and could stop functioning any day, and the green gear will continuously spin even when you increase local stability through the mod. You can also turn off stability altogether in the settings. To be honest, it doesn't feel great to resort to either tactic. I think it behooves the developers to add some kind of workaround to deal with surface stability, preferably one that is accessible early. Otherwise, the surface instability should go away outside of temporal storms. The underground instability makes more sense, and even then, it mostly serves as a nuisance that limits your time underground without adding any interesting dynamics. Sure, you can use temporal gears to increase stability or kill drifters to achieve the same effect, but using gears is unsustainable due to their rarity, and killing drifters isn't always an option to extend one's stay down there either. For such an important lore component, the mechanic feels underbaked. Currently, it adds little value and instead creates unnecessary tedium, which is a shame because there is potential here. Perhaps in time, temporal stability can be expanded into a full-fledged mechanics with interesting interplay. Another underbaked aspect of the game, the Jonas Devices. These devices themselves are rather cool and potentially useful. There are absolutely use cases for many of them. The night vision goggles would be useful in the suffocating darkness of Vintage Story. The various return teleporters would offer massive value if they were more accessible, and the rift suppression device would be a mainstay in any homestead. These high-tech devices were meant as a late-game aspirations, but even after spending hundreds of hours in a single world, they are virtually impossible to assemble. One challenging aspect of building Jonas Devices is the sheer variety of different parts. When you need one specific part out of 13, killing a monster that has 5% chance to drop a random part imparts only a tiny chance to succeed. On average, you would need 260 kills to acquire a specific part with those probabilities. Now, I want to be fully transparent. I don't know the exact drop percentages, so it could be a bit higher, but finding a monster capable of dropping these parts to begin with is no trivial task either. Then, you must get lucky for them to drop a part at all, and finally, it must be the right part. I've played for over 1,000 hours and have yet to assemble a single device organically. Granted, if I played a single world for long enough and focused on building these devices, I would undoubtedly be able to assemble a few, but it still feels rather excessive. The developers just recently added a chance for Jonas parts to drop from a few more monster varieties, which was a step in the right direction, but it's still not enough. In my opinion, we need even more sources of parts. More monsters should be able to drop them, and perhaps every drifter in the game should have a small chance to drop a part, proportional to the monster's frequency. Perhaps this would add a little more value and excitement to killing surface drifters in the end game. Another way to introduce these devices to the masses would be through the lore locations and dungeons that are being added to the game. These locations would offer a more deterministic path towards these devices. While expanding access to these devices, the devs should add a bunch of new ones to the game. For example, Wilderness Survival difficulty mode disables the map and the coordinates, a perfect opportunity to add a navigation-like device like a certain other blog game. Another idea would be a device that makes the glider have a bit more of an oomph. In its current iteration, the glider is simply bad. With animal riding and ship travel coming in 1.20, the glider will slide into irrelevance even more. No, I'm not asking for fireworks here, folks. Instead, I want something balanced for Vintage Story and its lore. The design space here is unlimited, and I always welcome cool stuff to play with and aspire to. I understand that this is probably a very low priority for the devs, since it only affects a minority of only the most dedicated players. I would venture a guess that 99.9% of the players have not yet assembled a single Jonas device. For casuals, Jonas tech is just a pipe dream, but maybe it shouldn't be. I want to end my list here. I can think of other niche things I would like to see added or changed. For example, I would like to see more colorful, concrete-like blocks in Vintage Story, and I can think of more than a few ways to improve the in-game world edit. However, we're getting into the weeds here, and perhaps they're better saved for another video. Meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed my second ever essay-style production. I welcome most discourse in the comments, but what doesn't add to the discussion is the just add mods type of take. It adds nothing of value to the discussion and can be a counter to just about anything. Mods are great, but we're talking about the base game here as presented by the developers. After all, the developers must continuously set expectations and expand functionality on which more and better mods can be developed in time. It's a win-win situation for everyone. If you're still here, I love you. Let me know if you like these types of videos. I can only make gameplay videos so fast, but these essay-style videos can be sprinkled in between because they don't require a full 100-day playthrough. Don't forget to leave me a comment. To this day, I do my best to answer every single comment. Feel free to disagree with my takes. I think it is vital to hear many different opinions, even if they're counter to yours. It is easy to live in your own bubble if you don't solicit other people's thoughts. And on that note, Oscillascape is beaming out.